Jesus, thank you. Thank you for being here. God, I pray that we would see you and that we would respond to where you already are in our lives, Lord. Thank you.
Tonight, we're just going to be talking about a relationship with Jesus and our connect question, which is, who knows the most about you and why do they know as much as they do? So I'll go with that. I think, honestly, my younger brother probably knows the most about me. And it's not having lived with me so much as having grown up in the same household. So I think he can relate to a lot of the same things that we just grew up with. And so it's not necessarily through conversations or anything like that, just in similar experiences and stuff like that. So with that, who knows the most about you and why do they know that much? Go ahead and discuss amongst your groups.
I do want to hear it. Someone at your group had a unique answer. I just want to hear it. Does anyone have any unique answers about who knows them well? How many live with a sibling? Sibling? Okay. Good. Good. How many live with a friend? Hopefully. I'm trying to think if there's another category.
Your parents.
Parents? Mine are my friends, so. Parents. Good. Interesting. And why would you say they knew as much as they did? Is it because you shared? Is it because you did life with? Is it
All of these.
all of the above? They're really nosy. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. As they're really nosy. I look forward to sharing this message with you. But I want to pray so that you don't just merely agree with what I have to say, but the fact that God who speaks, I think we'd all agree that God speaks, would speak directly to you in the same way He's spoken to me through this. So that's why I want to pray. I'm going to give a little preface to the prayer. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for not only knowing us, but wanting us to know you too. So I pray we would share our life with you, thinking through all the reasons people know us well, that we would talk to you, share with you, trust that you see us, trust that you've been with us in the hard times, and we have this desire to get to know you. We love you. And for those of us who don't know what it would look like to love you, I pray that you would draw them to you tonight. I love you. And all God's children said, Amen. I shared this with a few leaders last week, but it has so shaped me even since last week. Recently, I was at a brunch, which how cool don't like in my eyes since I go to brunches. Well, I do. And I'm at this brunch, and my sister somehow gets me to tell this certain story that I've told a lot. So I told it a lot specifically to my sister and my parents. It's just one of the, do you have that story that you kind of just share? It's like a funny story that you can kind of share in different contexts, or maybe not. That's hey, for sure, that one story, right? I got it, yeah. And so my sister gets me to start sharing this story, and I'm sharing the story. The story involves me being in high school, and I was on student council with this young girl who goes, we were all talking at one point, this young girl, she was a freshman at the time, I was a senior, and she goes, I have never been toilet paper. And I'm like, for some reason I felt kind of sad for her. I'm like, oh, that's kind of sad. She goes, well, it's because I live in a gated community, and then I didn't feel sad for her anymore. So I'm like, oh, and she's like, yeah, and she actually started to have this pride of I have not been toilet paper. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a challenge. So what I did, you'll appreciate this, I call up my crazy neighbor. His name's Colin at the time. He's when I was in high school. I call up Colin. Now, let me give you a sneak peek to Colin. Colin does not know Jesus, that's for sure. Colin has a mouth like a sailor, if you've heard that phrase. Has a mouth like a sailor, but he dressed up as a sailor to my sister's wedding so he could be the guy that has a mouth of a sailor, who is a sailor. And he thought it was hilarious to walk around cussing at her wedding so that he could cuss like a man who's like a sailor, dressed as a sailor. And everyone's like, this is so confusing. He's like, I'm Colin. So Colin also owned, at the time, a green VW bus with like the horns of some random animal on the front. This is Colin. He also could never afford a hot tub. His family was a little bit, and so what he did is he bought a plastic tarp and put it in the back of his dad's truck, and he would sit in the front yard and brag about his hot tub, dressed as a sailor, cussing like a sailor. So this is Colin. I call Colin and say, so there's this really sad girl who's never been toilet papered. He goes, well, we should fix that, or we should fix that. I said, great. And I go, yeah, let's for sure fix that. And I was like, and she was like bragging about it. He's like, yeah, we'll grab my van. So what we did is we went, it was trash day. So we went around and got all this random trash. We're like, this would be so funny. Because what we're gonna do is we're gonna put like any random miscellaneous things, not just toilet paper, we're like, she's gonna walk out and it's gonna be like a beach scene with like all these beach chairs and broken umbrellas. We're like, so we load up this VW van, right? And then we called the neighbor girl, Shayla, who didn't talk very much. We're like, Shayla, get in the van. She's like, so she gets it. And so now me and Shayla talking and we're all in the van. And we're like on our way to the right. So now here's where it gets really good. How am I gonna get in the gated community with like clearly Colin, he's already gonna be hard to convince that he's normal. And so I think here's what we're gonna do. And I did all these things so that when we got up to the gate, I told the gate person, I'm like, so it's my friend Ashley's birthday. And I was like, in fact, here's. And I had a present wrapped. And I was like, it's her birthday. We want to surprise her. And with your birthday present. And the guy goes, well, I'm obviously not just gonna let you in the gate. And I'm like, oh, no. Look, I actually got her mom's number so we could call. What I did was I programmed Shayla's phone to be the name of the mom. And so I hand the guard the phone. Shayla's in the back. He talks to Shayla. She goes, of course, this will be so fun to surprise Ashley for her birthday. The guard's like, sounds good, sounds great. Mrs. Dubrowski hangs up the phone. He's like, go ahead. I'm like, all right, so we are now in. I'm like, this is so good. So we, do the toilet paper, this is something we're like putting up the broken umbrellas, like the beach scene, we're taking pictures. And then suddenly, of course, like, you hear the alarm go off, or, it's like, the rent-a-cop type person's like coming down the street, we're like, get in the van, all get in there. And we're going out, and it's one of those, like, a scene where there's all the speed bumps, we didn't slow down, it's like, go. And the thing's coming down, we're like, get going! I am telling the story at this brunch with my dad, my sister, and all these people had heard it before, and some new friends. And my dad starts, at this point in the story, my dad starts laughing hysterically. He's like, that was the craziest. I remember when I was in the van. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I remember because we didn't slow down for the speed bumps. I'm like, Dad, you weren't in the car. Like how you feel right now, kind of confused, was the same as me, like, what? Like, I just like bring my dad to go like terrorize my friend. Like, I wouldn't call my dad, go, hey, I'm like, Dad, you weren't there. He's like, yes, I was. Remember, I was next to Shayla. I'm like, I wouldn't have put Shayla back with Shayla. Like, this is no, Dad, you weren't there. He's like, I was there. And he proceeds to start telling the rest of the story. I'm like, Dad, you weren't there. He's laughing. He's like crying, laughing to the point of the moments that he was there. We're laughing. I'm still laughing. I'm like, it's weird because he wasn't there. And here's the weird thing. My dad enjoyed that story. I would even say more so than I did, and I enjoyed the story a lot. Mind you, he wasn't there, but with the way he was joining in on my storytelling, he fully immersed himself in the story to the point where he put himself in it. But he was so in the story, he laughed at the funny parts. He even could tell the suspenseful parts. The moment with the freedom of exiting the gate, which we did in Conrad's car, and he was so into that story, and it changed the way he was listening and he began to participate in it. And it was so intriguing to me. And now it's become a family joke that anytime someone tells a familiar story, you can just insert yourself into it. It's very entertaining to do, just so you know. But I wonder if we enter into people's stories like that. Now, I'm not telling you to go pretend you're in people's stories. It's weird. But imagine if when Faith would be sharing something with her life, if I entered in it and felt the feeling she felt as she tells it. Imagine if she got to a point of tears of sharing some aspect of her life. If I was so in that I entered into that story with her. So I could feel as she feels, and that doesn't happen when I'm concerned with myself. It doesn't happen when I just simply want to be next to her and move on to the next point of conversation or whatever I want to talk about. It happens when I care so deeply about her that I'm willing to enter in. And so I think some of us know this about our God, as he so wanted to enter in to our lives that he became human. The incarnation of Jesus Christ became man, God, the God-man, to enter into our story. And what I love about John chapter 15 is he goes like this. He turns back toward us and says, and I want you to enter into mine. I so care about you that I don't just enter into your story. I want you to enter into mine, to feel all the feelings I've felt, to experience the life that I have, to live the loving life that I live. And in John 15, as I read this, I hope you hear it not as a conviction of what you haven't done, but an invitation about what's possible. Because that's what he does for us. In the same way that my dad entered into a story, I will say since thinking and meditating on that from sharing with a few leaders last week, I've so listened differently to people. And I hope you do too. So you look, by the way, you will look more like Jesus when you enter into their story, as they're sharing with you a hardship. And rather than where else your brain goes, you focus and narrow in so much so that you're willing to enter in with all the feelings that it might feel. To feel the burden. In college, I challenged myself to listen so much that I would wait 5 seconds after someone spoke to make sure I was listening beyond their words and into their experience. People were so uncomfortable with it. They just kept talking. Because we don't listen like that. So my hope is, as I even read the scripture now, and as you go to your table groups to read it yet again, that you would listen for all that Jesus was saying. All that he was feeling, and also receive the invitation that he has for you, as he says. Pull out these blue Bibles, jump on your phone so you won't get distracted. John chapter 15 is where we find this invitation. In John chapter 15, the way you'll find it, you get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is way over halfway to the right. So the middle of the Bible is this book of Psalms. If you want to know prayer and every season of life, you hang out in the Psalms. But if you go to the right quite a bit, you get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 4 guys who give an eyewitness account to the life of Jesus. John, being one of them, is more of a poetic writer, and he shares about Jesus. By the way, this is in the last few chapters we have before Jesus goes to the cross. And so with that, you can assume that this is some pretty important stuff. He's only going to have a few chapters to speak to these guys who are going to carry on his life. This is one of the things he chooses to share, John chapter 15, when he says this. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does not bear fruit, he prunes. So in other words, he either cuts off or he cuts back. That's a true statement about his interactions. But let's continue reading. Every branch that does not bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. I love that section. You bear fruit, showing yourselves to be his disciples. See, we're gonna bear fruit. Not necessarily the fruit of the Spirit that he's referencing, but our lives will produce something, and they will reveal something about where we remain. See, if right now your life is producing anxiety, I wonder where you're connected. if your life is producing fear, I would wonder where your connect is. Your life is going to produce something. And then here he says, what I want is you to bear fruit, which I want you to produce fruit. And what it would reveal is that you're connected to me. He continues, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. Have you ever thought about, maybe not, but have you ever thought about how much God the Father loves his son Jesus? Take a second. Have you ever thought about how much God the Father, perfect, holy God the Father, loves his son? The only word that could come to my mind is perfectly. Would you agree? I can't even imagine perfect love, but would you agree with that one? Great, now let's reread that last verse again. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Do you want to know how loved you are? The exact same amount that God the Father loves his son is how much you are already loved. I think if the Spirit were to do something in you, the Holy Spirit of God, it would free you from needing to find love elsewhere. And it would equip you to give away love as generously as he's given it to you. Do you feel free to give love away, or do you feel like you're just searching? Do you ever love people to be loved back? You been there? Ooh, that's too common. My story. Continue on. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his. And then he tells us why he's saying all of this. He says, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. So my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. So as the Father loves the Son, that's how the Son loves you, and it's also how you are called to love. How are we doing in the equation so far? Struggling? It continues. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, this is Jesus speaking, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. Then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This is my command. Love each other. First table talk discussion is this: reread. And you can decide in your group if you want to read it by yourself or if you want to try reading it again in the group. I've come to realize whenever I'm in church and I hear someone read a big chunk of scripture, I hear about 7% of it. So we're going to read it again. If you need to, and again, look at your group. Maybe you sit aside, read it yourself. However, you best want to have it reread, and then what stood out to you and why you think it stood out to you. And as you're having things stand out to you and going to share it, kind of ask yourself that one question. I wonder why God would have that stand out to me. Go ahead. You can decide how you want to do it different. I'm going to tell you, here's the simple progression outline of this message. And if you've been here long enough, you've probably noticed this is actually the outline of every message I give, because it's how I spend time in God's Word. If you're someone that maybe you've gone to church for a long time, but you're unsure of how to spend time in God's Word, I'm going to give you my way of doing it. There's many amazing ways of doing it. Here's my simple way. What's true about God? That's the first question I ask. Here's why. Because for years, I remember being in college even, and everyone assumed that I knew how to have quiet time with the Lord. People, I don't know about if that's anyone else in here, where everyone just kind of assumes you probably know how to have really good quiet time with the Lord. Everyone assumed it about me. And I remember being so discouraged because what I was doing was I was going to the Bible to be inspired, right? Like, why wouldn't it? It's God's word, I want to hear from him. So I would do this, and I'd open it up all like this and go, music's still playing, it makes me sound more spiritual. And then I'd get in my quiet time, turn on this music softly like this. Turn down the music, DJ. And then I would open my Bible and do this. Inspire me. And I would very quickly shut it because I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. A few things of why that didn't work. Number one, this Bible, this might sound kind of harsh, and I'll explain. This Bible was not written to you. It was written for you. That will change how you read it. See, if it's written to you, you sit back, do your work. As if you're the main character of the quiet time. That's point number 2 why it doesn't work. See, because this book is not about us, but it's absolutely about him. See, if the Bible's written to you, you sit back and you read it, and you should feel all the feels, right? But no. See, the Bible's written for us, which requires, it was written to a different audience at a certain time, but God knew full well that if we were to peek into it, of who the Bible was written toward, I would peek in and do the work. What work? To figure out who this is about and what's something that I can, what's the timeless truth. And the only thing that's timeless in it is God himself. See, who God was is who God is and who God will forever be. So you can always be confident that any truth that you ever read that's true about God then is true about God now and will be true about God tomorrow and your future hardships. So if you always open the Bible and say what is true about God, you can be confident that that will be true now. Then I say, and what does it have to do with me? Why? Because, me. So what's true about God? Number 2, what does it have to do with me? Sometimes it's convicting. Makes me feel like, ooh, I should do more or whatever. Sometimes it's empowering. Wow, I'm Christ's body. I am his literal hands on this earth. I am the eyes to which Christ sees people. I am the mouth to which God speaks words to people. I am his hands, I am his feet to take me to places or countries that need them. So you might be encouraged, you might be inspired, you might be convicted, but then ask yourself that question, what does this reveal about me? Then I tend to jump into, what does this reveal about why Jesus came? And what his death and resurrection has to do with it? Where's the gospel? And then lastly, if you're courageous, ask, and how are you calling me to respond to it? And how are you calling me to respond? So true about God, reveal about me, expose the gospel, and then how are you calling me to live in response? So we're going to do that together. So chapter 15, verse 1, Jesus is saying, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. What is true about God? Who knows it? Who knows it? No.
He's the gardener.
Oh, what, right?
He's the gardener.
He's the gardener. I like that. My Father is the gardener, and Jesus says that he is the true vine. Interesting, he uses the word true. Remember a couple weeks back, by a couple weeks, I mean, 3 months ago, when we did that crazy thing where we had 25 minutes to study one verse. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Who was here for that one? That was fun. Some of you were like, I'm glad I wasn't. Yeah, you missed out. So, but what was significant about me? We spent 25 minutes on one verse. And we're going to have to write down as many things as you can think of. My best way to go about that Bible study was to remove one word and read it again and then wonder why this word adds to the sentence. That was my structure, how I pull things out. So why did he add the word true? Well, I'll give you a little bit of context. See, coming into this passage, Jesus knew his audience. Why? Because he entered into their lives. And so he knew his audience, and his audience knew the Old Testament. In fact, a majority of them probably even had those first 5 books memorized. So he knew that what they knew is that whenever the term vine was ever addressed in the Old Testament, it was always referencing God's people, the Israelites, who failed. God's chosen people, the Israelites, failed. And anytime he used this kind of illustration of vine, what he was using it was to represent these people who just kept failing. These people who were supposed to be a light brought about darkness. They would choose to make the right decisions, failed yet again, chose selfishness, wanted to go back to Egypt. They just kept missing it. So as you look throughout Scripture, when you come across a vine, it's usually a reference. People are usually referring to those people who completely missed it. And Jesus walks in on the scene to these people that knew that the Old Testament Israelites missed it. And Jesus walks in and he leans in to their story and goes, hey, I'm the true vine. What they missed, I won't. And what's true about who God was is true about who God is, which means this: even though you missed it, he's the true vine. He is everything you should have been but weren't. I was just today reminded, do you remember the moment right before Jesus went to the cross? And one of the leaders looks to the crowd and says, you can release one prisoner, Jesus, or who's the other guy? Barabbas. And what did the crowds yell? Probably the best picture of what it means that Jesus was the true vine is that interaction. Barabbas, based on the standards of that day, deserved death. Jesus, based on the standards of that day, which was perfection, earned life. That Barabbas got what he didn't deserve, freedom. Jesus got what he didn't deserve, death. Jesus is walking into the scene and going, when they failed, I won't. When you failed, I won't. So don't connect yourself to anyone else. See, the Israelites were supposed to be people that would bear fruit. They didn't. Jesus goes, I have a plan. You want to know the plan? It's me. That's why he goes off about saying, not only am I the true vine, you're, by the way, going to be the branches. You want to produce fruit, you can't do it on your own, but you can connect to the only one who could, and the only one who can, and the only one who will produce it in you. And I always, sometimes whenever I get to these illustrations, it was funny, I was studying this passage and going, what illustration can I make? And then I remembered, this whole thing is an illustration. That should probably work fine. See, Jesus was probably just walking along the road and just saw kind of this stick. It's one of the most simple passages. I think sometimes pastors overcomplicate things. Like, and what he meant by that was, no, let me just tell you what he's saying. He literally probably saw something like this and went, when it's not connected, good luck. And when he says really simple things like, if it's not connected, can't really bear fruit. And then if you think about it, he says, I'm either going to chop it off if it doesn't make any, or I'm going to cut it back so it produces more. But they chop it off, and then what they do with anything that's dead, they throw it into a fire. That's not a punishment. That's just the reality of death. Apart from me, he says, you can't produce fruit, but I'm the true vine. Remain. Be in me, I'm in you, and I'll do the work. And just yesterday, I was walking around a park, and I was looking at the branches, and they were so calm. And then I was praying for you, and I thought, I don't think any of you would use that word to describe your season of life. And I thought, where else have you been remaining? In other words, other words that it uses to describe abiding, or where have you been hanging out, dwelling? Where does your mind go? Where do you spend your time? What are you aware of that's present? Are you more aware of your depression or his presence amidst it? Where are you abiding? So he keeps just going like, let's just talk about the connection point, because I'll do the work. But where are you connected? So he says, again, truth about God, number one, I am the true vine. I'm what you couldn't do. He starts off this entire little speech he gives with just really good news. I know you won't be, but I am. And then he gets into that second one, and someone else called it out. I am the true vine, and my Father is the, Ryan said it. Attaboy. Pressure. The gardener. The gardener is the one who owns the vineyard. When I think about God owning or controlling, I've realized God's authority is not a power over you, it's more of a source thing. You see, because you can rebel against a power, but if you rebel against a source, You lose yourself. And it's so weird because even at a young age, my son is 3, and I also have another son, 2 months, hey. But my one son is 3, and his best friend is his cousin. And her name's Birdie. It's not her real name, but she goes by Birdie, and she's just a little nugget with like a bowl cut. On accident, super cuts. You should have learned. So, it was my mom's fault. I don't know why I'm telling you that. But Birdie, sweet little Birdie. You know what her favorite word is because she has 2 older brothers? Who knows? What? No, but close. Mine. No one had to teach it to her. From a young age. Mine. 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 And part of me gets frustrated at times when my little son hangs out with her because he starts saying some of those little things she says. But that's her thing. She goes, mine, mine. And what I've come to realize is we don't have to teach control. That's been in us from the very beginning, right? When the serpent showed up, page 3. Did God really say, is God really in control, or do you want to take control? By the way, do you want to know why you're so anxious? It's because you think you're in control. So even more good news, he goes, I'm the gardener. I'm in charge. I'm in control. See, not only do 3-year-olds say it's mine, I believe we do it about every aspect of our life. And whether or not we know it, we look up to God and we shake our fist. Here's a few that as I was meditating on, you all, I think we've said. Not directly, but it sounds like this. But God, that was my health. I want it back. I don't want this disease. I'm tired of feeling down, scared of surgery. God, it was my health. It's mine. I'm in control. I'm going to starve myself. I'm in control. My health is mine. I earned that job. Why don't I have it? I earned it more than they earned it. Said that one? I earned that money. Why don't I have enough of it? It's mine. Says the person by the grave. He was mine. The mom who thought about their adult child, which might be you. You want to know why they're probably so worried? Because they think you're theirs, and they feel that need to control. This was my future. I planned it. I worked for it. I went to school for it. I deserved opportunities by now. They're mine. I deserved a boyfriend by now. I've done all the right things by now. It's mine. And I believe God responds to the 3-year-old Birdie in all of us when he says, nope, it wasn't yours. He wasn't yours. She wasn't yours. In fact, this is crazy, but you're not even yours. He's the gardener. He's in control. He owns it. And he invites you to play your part, which means to let go of what you're trying to control and grab a hold of the source. What are you holding on to so hard? Future? Someone else's health? Your own? What are you holding on to? I think him claiming who he is, he's asking you to play your part, which he describes in verse 5. When he reminds us yet again, I am the vine. You, here's your part. You're the branches. No wonder he goes off for so long to give the effects of it. And that's where he continues on. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit as the branch. Apart from me, he can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he's like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Verse 7, if you remain in me and my word remains in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given to you. If you're wondering why, it's always verse 8, to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. And then you show other people that you're my disciples by what you bear. And then I love how he then defines how to remain. Verse 10. If you obey my commands, you will remain. God's love language is obedience. I have thought all week about Norm's message last week. In case you missed it, I'll give a brief summary of his first story. Basically sees a crazy person in Jack in the Box. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't have had the same response as Norm did, which reminds me and encourages me that Norm remains in the right places. So he sees a crazy guy, and rather than judging, unfortunately, like I would have, he just started to pray for this guy. Just started to pray for this guy. And there's a phrase he kept saying, which is, this guy is not living. This guy is not what God would intend for this guy. That guy's, in this language, he's remaining in somewhere else. He's defeated by the world. He's run down. He's remaining somewhere else. And the crazy part, and why I know that Norm really knows the Lord, is because he had a heart of compassion toward a crazy guy. I would have a heart of fear and look for my wall. That's honest. But I know Norm must remain in the right places because he looked like Jesus in that moment. And then as he asked Jesus what he should do, and he felt the prompting to pray, he did. And then as he felt the prompting to walk outside and share with him the gospel, he did. And I love it because everyone who was here last week was waiting for the big ending, right? Who was here? You're waiting for the moment where he goes, and then I shared the gospel, and the guy's like, you're right. You know, like who was waiting for that moment? And then the way he shares it goes, and then I obediently shared with him who Jesus was, and nothing happened. And then he goes, next story, and I'm like, what? Thus proving God's love language is obedience, not the results. Because who's in charge of the crazy guy in Jack in the Box? Not us. Who's in charge of how he responds to truth? Not us. Who's in charge of your well-being? Not us. Sometimes we won't recognize who he is if we're trying to play the wrong part. Let go. It says, you want to know how to remain? Obey me. How do you obey me? You become aware of me. You become aware of my presence. And then I love how he ends the entire passage. He says, and this is my, look at the key word in verse 17, I believe. Yeah. So he says, verse 10, if you obey my commands, you will remain. So obey my commands. And then he's very explicit, verse 17, and this is my command. You want to know what it is? Love people. How do you love people? Fruit. What's the fruit of the Spirit? You remember, like a song, or remember Galatians 5? Yeah, you know the song. Okay. How many fruit are there? Trick question.
One.
There's one. That's when they're confused. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Let me explain again. Megan, singular, is cool. So we're the kid, but I just think it's cool. I'm cool. All right. But if Ellie was with me, Megan and Ellie are cool, right? 2, 3. Haley, come over here. Yeah. Megan, Ellie, and Haley are cool. Thank you. What's your name? Mikey. Yeah. Megan, Ellie, Haley, Mikey, all in the line, awkwardly, are cool. But if I was over here by myself, Megan is cool. Thank you. Now go sit down. The fruit of the Spirit is, which means love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. All of them rise and fall together as one. Aspects of the fruit of the Spirit is What is the fruit? The fruit is the byproduct of looking like Jesus. The fruit is living like Jesus. See, you can't be loving without being peace. You can't be love, joy, peace, patience, kind without really loving. Otherwise, you're not really kind. You're inauthentic. They rise and they fall together. And the way we do love means we don't pursue the action, we pursue the source of it. So let me ask you, where have you been remaining? Where have you been hanging out in your mind? What have you been holding on to? And one more note about when he calls us the branches. I love that he reminds us again, I'm the vine, he says, and you are the branches. I'm the vine, you are the branches. And I think the reason he says that is just to remind you yet again, you also are not the vine for someone else. I don't know if anyone else in this room has sensed what I've sensed, to carry the burden of someone else. Does anyone relate? You are not their vine. You are a branch that can showcase who you're a disciple of. You cannot be their vine. And you also need to make sure you're connected to the true vine and not another. And the byproduct will look like love. But I will say this about the single fruit. Fruit is an amazing byproduct, but a terrible goal. The goal is not to look beautiful. The goal is to pursue Christ. And as you hang out with him, you'll look like him. Did you know that you're the average of your 5 closest friends? Did you think about that? Who do you hang out with? Where's your time go? Who gets the best of you? And where are you remaining? Who is God? God's the true vine. That's who he is. Who else is he? He's the gardener. He's the one in control. Who are we? We are the branches. What's our job? What is the gospel? The fact that we couldn't perfectly remain in him, he remains in us. And what's the byproduct? God, how are you leading us to respond? He says, obey my commands. Oh, by the way, this is my command. Just love a bunch of people. You want to know where our example is? It's him. Let's pray. Father, I thank you. Thank you for first loving us. And I love that even before you command us to love anyone else, you just remind us of how loved we are. Because you always do that. You're always the source of the love. So God, if we've been trying to love or just be joyful and fake it, I pray that we would stop trying to be the fruit and rather just take a moment. God, give us courage to take a moment and consider our relationship with you. And I pray, Lord, in this moment, as we consider our relationship with you, would this not feel like a I should have, or a burden, or an obligation, or a guilt, or a conviction? I pray, Lord, that it would be the same invitation that you wanted with your original disciples. Would this right now, as they consider the relationship with you, would they all personally feel an invitation? Not guilt. Would they feel invited into deeper intimacy with you? So God, if we need to confess the places we've been abiding, trying to connect to, trying to find our life from, pray we would confess not out of a burden, but out of a freedom. God, I don't want to connect to the things I've tried to control. God, I pray that we would hear words directly from you. Ones like, hey, I'm the true vine. I want to give you sustenance. I'm in control. Just hang out with me. So right now, Lord, as we just quiet our minds, if you want to keep our eyes closed or open or just relax for the next 3 minutes, help us get better at hanging out with you. To see how loving and joyful and full of peace you you are. Thank you for your patience with us. God, you can be harsh and you choose to be kind. When we and your people throughout all generations have been faithless, you've been faithful. Thanks for being good despite our bad. Help us, Lord, to have good self-awareness and to give you control. I pray that this invitation will be life-giving to us as we hang out with you and abide, not just read about it, not just agree with it, but right now, in the next 3 minutes, would we just remain with you? Help us stay focused.
As we sing this next song, it's a really simple song. It doesn't have a lot of words. But I think there's beauty in its simplicity. It's honestly one of my favorite songs. And as the words literally just say, all I need is you. And my hope for us is that tonight that we can believe that. We can believe that Jesus is all we need. Because what could he do with a room full of young adults that really believed that all they needed was Jesus? Father, may we recognize that you're all we need. All I need is you.
continue singing that chorus one more time, I want us to verbally acknowledge what we don't need as an act of worship. For instance, I don't need lots of money. What about you? As an act of worship, all you need is the Lord. What have you been trying to control? What have you been trying to hold? And as an act of worship, would you let God know, and even proclaim around you, I don't need what? places we've tried to find life from. Help us remember. Amen. So, to give someone an encouragement, you can give someone encouragement like, you're funny, right? And then guess what it does? It puts someone in a box and then tells them in order to be encouraged, or encourage means to have courage, right? In order to find courage, if someone told me I'm funny, I would feel the need to be funny to have courage. So you must be very careful with your words and how you give encouragement. So one thing my family did a while ago is instead of just giving encouragements like you're funny or you're pretty or you're whatever, what we do is we go, here's how I see Christ in you. So then when they would throughout the rest of the year, when they're looking for courage, they would look to become more like Christ. So if you've seen Christ in either of these two men, I would love you to let them know how. It could be a simple word, but here's the phrase my family uses, and since this church is the family, we're going to do it. So, Josh, the way that I see Christ in you is in your thoughtfulness. Because I think about Jesus, and I think he was always thinking, but for his Father's glory and the good of people. And I think when you spend the time thinking, it's usually for similar things. Jason, the way I see Christ in you is your urgency in people being seen. One thing I always giggle at is if you've heard keys jingling at any point, it's probably Jason running somewhere to make sure of a few things, that people are taken care of, that people are comfortable, that the environment is the right temperature, that something over there that now is leaking water is now fixed. Jason runs with urgency to make sure, and I love every time, anytime you see him running, it's usually for people to be more comfortable or to be seen or for them not to be distracted.
Amen.
And I love that your job here, even in this building, is to do just that. So if you have other words you'd like to add to that before you leave, make sure on your way out you find those two guys. Hopefully they'll be in and out celebrating, which would be great, and there will be cake. Lastly, Chad is going to give us the blessing, and there's a picture, DJ, that I had there in the last slide. If you guys would all stand and extend your hands to receive this blessing.
Nice.
So just a little background on the blessing for those of you that are new. So the idea behind the blessing is that it's placed upon you. So I think it's super fitting tonight that we stand in a posture of open arms to receive that, as well as to go ahead and be releasing that control and anything that was kind of mentioned in abiding with God tonight. So young adults of Arbor Road, may you know that God chose you, that you're invited to abide within Him, and that your only job is to love and just to be that branch, that you don't have to be in control, you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be funny or smart or know what you're doing, you just have to abide. And dear Lord, I just want to thank you for this group and our ability to come and gather tonight and worship and grow closer to you, Lord. I want to thank you for the community that we have here, and that it extends beyond just this time, that it continues out into, in and outs and birthday festivities and the rest of the week. And we say this all in your Son's name. Amen.